ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage the CEO of Domo, Mr. Josh James.
All right, all right, all right. I hope everyone here is having a good time. Silicon Slopey, as we called it the first 6 or 7 years, is blowing up. We've had some awesome keynotes. Love that Stuart was here yesterday. Love that Mitt was here this morning. Steve Young was impassioned. You should have seen him backstage. He went on for another hour back there. Everyone's looking for footballs to get signed. I had my chest signed. It was getting weird. But also, it was really cool to see on the pledge yesterday, there were over 100 companies that signed up in the audience. So bravo to you guys. That's awesome. And then we went to a really cool event upstairs. They had, there was like a reception for the parody.org organization. And there were like 40 tables up, or 30 tables up, and there were a bunch of executives and a bunch of female executives, and like every 2 minutes you rotate a table, and just everyone was getting to know everybody, and it was really cool. So it's really fun to see all the progress that we're making. And now I'm really excited to bring someone on stage who is extremely well respected, one of the very few executives in tech, female that's CEO or a president, and she's president over at Splunk. And please help me welcome to the stage Susan St. Ledger. Take a hug. Thanks for coming out to Utah.
Excited to be here. This is amazing. I remember you telling me about this a year ago, and it's like it's grown a little bit.
It's grown a little bit. I pitched to Susan that we were going to double last year, and I don't know if she believed me, but we more than doubled. It's been awesome.
Very exciting.
So you travel a lot?
All the time. United is my living room for the most part.
You told me last night you watched a depressing movie one time on a plane.
I watched Up in the Air on the plane. For those of you who remember the George Clooney movie where he had no life. It's pretty ironic.
So your balance is a little bit off. Unless
Just a bit.
United counts. Okay.
Just a bit.
Well, you've had quite a career. You started off NSA engineer, and now you're president of field ops and sales at Splunk. What was that experience like?
Just very, very fortunate. I grew up in small town America in Pennsylvania. I loved math and science. So when you grow up small town America in Pennsylvania and you love math and science, they tell you to be, especially back then, a doctor. So I went into college as a pre-med, took a computer science course just because I was intrigued by it and ended up switching my major to computer science. So it was a lucky guess. I wish I could say it was well thought out, but it was just a lucky guess. Certainly I never could have envisioned going from being a computer science major in Pennsylvania to many years later, being
just
president
a few years ago, but
just a few.
But what was it like in terms of gender diversity in those classes back then?
So when I started in computer science, that graduating class, we started only 5 females in that class, and only 2 of us actually graduated computer science.
Wow. So you're a trailblazer. So you were at NSA. I guess you should tell us a little bit about that, because it's not every day you talk to engineers from NSA.
Well, you can talk to them, they just can't tell you anything.
Oh, is that still where we're at? Okay.
No, actually, it's a lot better. I can genericize it, given it was so long ago. So probably the most unique experience at NSA was my last assignment there. I was the leader, one of 2 leaders on a project working on a new messaging system that was for what they call critics, which is messages from the field into into NSA that are the most critical, and they have to be timely. And of course, back then, timely wasn't what timely means today. Timely meant back then it was like 7 minutes. But the idea was that they needed to revamp the messaging system. Well, ironically, we started the new system, we started building it 3 years before Desert Storm, and it was right around Desert Storm when they needed to actually put it into about 3 months before Desert Storm when we launched it.
Okay, cool.
So it was very stressful. We had to run both systems in parallel. And I think my biggest takeaway was that to this day, it's still the only job I had that if I screwed up, people died. And so it really, I think, gave me a lens for the future of how to deal with stress and what really stress meant.
That's pretty heavy, actually.
It was, and I was, 27 years old at the time.
So did you think about that at the time, too? You're like, if I screw this up, people die?
I did, yeah, because there were only 2 of us that knew the system end to end, and we ran the old system in parallel, obviously, but it was, yeah, as a 26, 27-year-old, it was a pretty stressful time.
And then you went from there, at some point ended up at Salesforce. Would love to ask you about that. How did you navigate your career? How did you put yourself in position to get promoted and get these executive opportunities? And then also, what'd you learn from Salesforce?
So I think part of it is risk-taking and part of it is serendipitous, but I think just by nature, very intellectually curious. Although I said I bore easily. And so when I was at Sun, I had the opportunity at one point to be the chief of staff for the CEO and the president, Scott McNeely and Ed Zander. And that really taught me so many aspects about the entire breadth of the business and all the different dials of the business, so not just the engineering side anymore. Eventually, I crossed over into sales, and...
Good question. So when you were the chief of staff for Scott, when you got offered that job, did you see that as, I'm going to be doing some administrative type stuff, or did you see, hey, here's an opportunity to see everything?
That's a great question. No, it was intended to take a high potential and accelerate their career. So they would stack rank. Sun was very good at talent management and succession planning, which I think is a lost art today. And we'll talk about that in a little bit maybe, but so they took the top high 10 potential directors in the company and let them interview for the job, and I was fortunate enough to get the job. And the idea is that you're literally, at the time Ed was president and COO, I probably spent 80% of my time with him and probably about 20 with Scott. And you learn every dial of the business, and it's just incredibly valuable, and it just gave me an entire, And
that's when Sun was as hot as they ever were, right?
Yes, yes, that was when we reached our peak. For sure. So it went, I think it was a little over $1 billion when I got there, and it was $22 billion at its peak.
Wow.
So pretty amazing, and that high growth scale.
And then you left, and then they had to kind of just sell it off?
Oh, yeah, not exactly.
Oh, okay.
But the path, I think the thing I'd call out about Sun is the opportunity that high growth gives people. So I started as an SE, a systems engineer, pre-sales systems engineer, and 10 years later, I was running a $3.2 billion sales organization. And
wow.
That's what happens in a high growth environment, because you can't possibly hire everybody from the outside, and so you have to bet on your top potential talent and stretch them. And having that ability to take on those stretch roles was really, really exciting.
Were you sometimes tempted, and I know it is the case with a lot of people in tech companies, sometimes people will jump for a title, other people will stay and ride those things out, and were you tempted in those situations? How did you make those decisions?
It's really interesting. I wasn't, and I don't know where it came from, but I had this concept about resume momentum and making sure that rather than just worrying about title, I was thinking about the broader skill set. And I think about things in terms of what are all the skills and competencies that I would need to be a senior executive. And then really make sure, and it's things like, P&L experience, global experience, having done direct sales and indirect sales, having done government and commercial, it's like really having a broad, and I call those pivots. And I think that pivots really are important. It shows intellectual curiosity, it shows intellectual capacity, and I think it gives you a much different view when you look at any business.
And then you were at Salesforce during I guess they're still doing
They're still doing that. It's a great company, and the only reason I left was because Splunk was such a good opportunity. I think Splunk could be the next Salesforce, but we'll get to that in a minute. Salesforce, I was there 11 and a half years with one brief stint where I left to become president of a startup. And then Mark bought us, and I was back within 6 months.
Mark didn't like that you left, was trying to figure out how to get you back, and the answer was buy the company.
Well, if so, it cost...
There's probably a lot of companies here that would love to have you come work for them that Mark would buy then.
It was a great experience. I came back and then ran that division. We put together 3 acquisitions to create the Marketing Cloud, and I was, from a sales perspective, CRO of that for the next almost 4 years.
So I've heard you've been, over the years, I've heard you numerous times be very complimentary about Benioff. What's he like? What do you learn from him? What did you glean from him? I mean, he's one of the best leaders in tech for sure. Give us a little idea of what he's like and what we can all learn from that.
Yeah, he's nothing short of brilliant, but certainly not easy. But that ties into, I think, you learn the people from the most that stretch you and make you grow. And so my joke about Mark is I wouldn't trade him for anything in the world. He's by far the greatest influence on my career. But there were certainly days I wanted to. I can't believe I just let that be on tape. But anyway, so Mark taught me a lot. I think the biggest thing, the most tactical thing is just this creating a culture of continuous improvement. We would celebrate every quarter, and we had, and I was there when it was a little over 100 million, and I was there when it hit 8 billion, so a long ride. And so we would celebrate all the wins, mostly every quarter, right? Really big wins, and then we'd be in, the management meeting the next week, and if that was your only lens into the company, you would swear that we were the worst performing company on the face of the earth, because all we did was focus on everything we needed to do better. And I'm a huge believer in that, and that's a big, part of what I've taken to Splunk. I think the other big gift...
Not everyone, though, can survive in that kind of...
You're right.
A lot of people, it wears on them.
It's not for everybody. There's no doubt about it. I think one of the things that I talk about is not everybody knows what great looks like and how to get to great. And until you've seen it, you actually don't understand how powerful it can be. And it doesn't mean it has to be a beat you up type environment, but it has to be focus on, you always have to be asking yourself, what could I do differently? What could I be doing better? And take advantage of the fact that hindsight is always 20/20. So ignoring it is foolish.
So then how did you take that and manage your own teams and get them to stretch?
So that's the second part of what I believe Mark gave me, was this concept of mindset, right? So I believe he taught me to think so much bigger, and so there were 2 gifts. Number one, he shifted my mindset to understand just how big things could be, but he also gave me the tools to teach me how to shift other people's mindsets. And let me give you an example at Salesforce, and then I'll talk about the same with Splunk. So at Salesforce, I think the ASP when I first got there was 67K, okay? And there's a quote, I believe it's a Bill Gates quote that Mark used to use all the time, which is, you always overestimate what you can do in a year and you underestimate what you can do in 10. And that was definitely the case. So 67K, I think it was when I got there in 2004. 8 years later, right before I left to go to the acquisition, right before I left to go to Buddy Media to be the president, we did an $80 million deal and a $123 million deal in the last quarter of the year.
Wow.
And that's 8 years, right? And he believed it. He believed it back in that first year that I was there, but again, just changing that mindset and making people think bigger. And so what I brought to Splunk is trying to take a lot of what I learned from Mark from that perspective, because at Splunk, it's awesome. We're $1.2 billion and change, a very exciting company, still in the high growth category, and high growth at scale is hard. But what I would say is that we have a $55 billion TAM. And that's only the pieces that the market actually understands. There's so much more that our platform does that the market doesn't understand.
Right.
And so trying to make people understand that 0 to $1 billion and what the shoulders were standing on of the people who did that, it's amazing, and I applaud them all. But we got to take this from 1 to 5 and from 5 to 10, and there's so much more work to be done to get there.
So having been in sales for a while and understanding positioning and how that impacts the effectiveness of the sales organization, one thing I've always been impressed with you is how you think about platforms versus solutions and the challenges and the positive and negatives of those different types of opportunities. Can you explain your thinking behind that and experiences?
Sure. You and I have talked about this a lot because we have similar challenges when it comes to that, and that we both have these really powerful platforms that we're selling. The truth of the matter is nobody's ever looking to buy a platform. People are looking for a solution to a specific problem 90% of the time. And so even though there are tremendous benefits, once people start to understand your platform and it goes viral within a company, it's really hard to lead with that platform sell. And so it's really important to find the most highly repeatable use cases and to mirror those with the sales force and teach the sales force. I'm a huge believer that the way you teach a sales force is through customer stories. Customer stories, customer stories, customer stories. It's the way salespeople learn, and then they can pattern match. Pattern match by use case, pattern match by vertical, industry, pattern match by just the maturity curve that a company's on. And so I'm a big believer in that. And that's why, the conversations that you and I have been having, it's what I'm trying to focus on at Splunk, is to give people more specific sales plays, as opposed to, we have everything, we can do it all, what would you like to do?
Right.
Does that make sense?
For sure. So what about, we've talked a little bit about the parity pledges that people have been making here, and the desire to get more diversity and more balance. What have you done in your career? What are you doing at Splunk? What do you think about those kinds of activities? So important, way past due, but so excited that it's happening. At Splunk, we're actually doing a lot. I'll say we have a very innovative chief HR officer, and Tracy Adkin, and she's fantastic. And she's certainly the person who jumpstarts it. But the truth of the matter is, it's a business problem that needs to be driven by business leaders. You can't leave it up to HR. And that's the one thing that, as our executive committee, we've committed to, is that it is a business problem and we're solving it together, even though she's the spearhead of the what we're doing. Some of the what we're doing lines up very nicely with the parity pledge, which is making sure that we always have female candidates in the interview process. But I think just one thing to call out, and I unfortunately wasn't here yesterday, so I don't know if this was talked about, but it's really important as you explain to your teams why, right? It's not just because you should have gender diversity, but it's also because it impacts the business in a very positive way, right? And I know there are a lot of statistics you guys probably went through yesterday, but the one that I love from a selling perspective is that for every 1% that you move the gender needle in sales, it correlates to 3% increase in sales. And there's a lot of other statistics that line up with that across all other types of performance within a company. Wow. But we're doing, we actually just we just completed across the entire company gender bias training. That was very well done. So it was on demand gender bias training, and it was eye-opening. Even having lived in this environment for for all of my career, it was eye-opening to see some of the things that occurred in the training and that you don't recognize as gender bias. We're even doing things like, so we're anonymizing candidate resumes as they come in. We're anonymizing them so that there's no gender bias in the initial selection of who's going to get the interviews. And then we're also, this one was surprising to me too, it turns out that when you do your job descriptions, the language you do can actually help whether or not you're attracting gender diversity. Oh. And so we actually are working with a company, or with a tool that helps us create gender neutral job descriptions. Oh, that's really cool.
So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, I haven't
it's exciting.
So what, as you've navigated, in amazing places, what would you recommend to the audience? There's hopefully a lot of people out here that can end up, being presidents of companies, and what are the things that you learned? How do you manage yourself? What are your mantras? So my very first one is talent management is the most important thing you'll do. I joke with my team and tell them my only talent is knowing what talent looks like, and that's kind of all you need. If you hire great people, the rest will happen. If you don't hire great people,
and you have the greatest ideas in the world, you'll never be able to execute them. And that particularly goes at scale. It's harder and harder, and so you have to work harder and harder to make sure it's top talent. And the other thing is it's not one size fits all in terms of talent. Like if you're in a market creation opportunity, the person you're looking for is very different than in a market replacement opportunity. If you are in a fast, high-growth environment, then you better be interviewing for people who are resilient and people who like the type of thing we're talking about, that continuous improvement, that pace, that fast change. I remember meeting a kid at Salesforce, and he was a kid. He had just come out of college, and he was like in the inside sales. And we were at SKO, and we had Tony Robbins talking to us about our core values, and his top core value was certainty. And I was like, oh God, never gonna make it. And he was seriously gone within 6 months. So anyway, I think that talent would be number one. And then the second thing that I would say is, driving transformation is really hard, and we're in a world where you have to continually transform your company. It has to do that continuous improvement. And so the two things I would say, one of them tied to that talent management, is communications in driving transformation is critical. And I think about communications as one-to-one and then one-to-many. And then one-to-one, I trust that I can be a little irreverent because it's you. I'm a big believer in direct communications, and you're doing a disservice to your people if you don't give them the tough messages.
Right.
The greatest teachers you ever had were your hardest teachers. The greatest managers you ever had were the ones that stretched you, not the ones who told you how great you are. And being direct and really telling people the truth is so important. And so you're the one with all the quotes. I don't have that many. But one of my favorites that I always tell my people is, licking the sugar off shit is a waste of time. It's just a waste of time. So just give it to them direct.
Licking sugar off shit is a waste of time. Okay, give us an example of that.
Well, it's when you sugarcoat a message, right? And so, I mean, I've seen people, I literally have seen people try and give somebody a performance management message, and they'll sit there for an hour with a performance improvement plan in front of them, and at the end of the session, somebody will go, okay, but overall, you're still happy with me, right? Because you weren't direct, you weren't pointed, you weren't. Right. It's just a waste of time. And
give them the feedback, let them deal with it, let them process.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the one-to-many, I think the thing that's hardest is that, especially the larger you are, if you're driving transformation, you have to continually explain the why. And if you want people to come along with you, it's why. Why are we making this change? Why are we doing this? Why is this the design principle? And I think that's really important. And the second piece to that is, as a leader, if you're explaining you've got to be explaining the why, and you have to do it repetitiously. Because remember, as a leader, if you're driving transformation, you probably knew about it months before you rolled it out. So you've had time to comprehend, you understand it, you're on board, you roll it out to your team once, and then you wonder why people aren't on board and following you. It's that it has to be the why, and it has to be the repetition. And I think that's really where we fall down a lot. When people drive change, they put it out there once and then think everybody's going to follow. So awesome. Those are some of the key things that I would say.
Well, thank you very much for taking time out of your week and coming out and spending
Pleasure to be here.
time with us.
Exciting to be here.
All right,
St.
ladies
Ledger.
and gentlemen, let's thank again Susan St. Ledger and Josh James. Thank you both very much. Thank you, Susan, for being here.